recording. Thanks for joining us online. My name is Kirsty McGrath. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we meet today, which is the Eora Nation and the Gadigal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. I just ask that we're all very respectful when it comes to the sort of bit of code of conduct when it comes to any kind of user group, especially because we come in with a lot of opinions when it's a user group. If you are online, please use appropriate GIFs, text, images. I am not really quite watching it. I probably should in case there are any comments coming in, and that would require me having my glasses on and keeping my mobile around. Yeah, keep an eye out for me. Excellent. You can tell me if something's going on. Okay. So my company is On Point Solutions. I work alongside organisations doing adoption rollouts. You can find me in a variety of places, and I also now have a bio site too to be able to help. I always do the what have I been up to over the last month. I meant to actually I should have gone a little faster, yes. Grey out there, my brother was turning 50 next year, 49, so excuse the swearing. Had a bit of fun, and Vivid with my grandson. So it was a really enjoyable time over the last month. So what's new in adoption? A little quieter across the adoption space. We had a lot previously. I have got some new videos that have gone up on my YouTube. There's a whole heap more of the Ask Me Anythings that I actually do with the Collab team at Collab Talk. So if you do have any questions that you want to ask, they're out in the community or on Collab Talk, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the likes, we do answer it for you as a specialist community across the globe. We all come together depending on what the topics are and our specialty. The June call has not gone live for the Change Champions. July is supposed to be coming up, but we haven't got the dates for that yet. So cross fingers, we will see what's happening. There was a cancellation. Just gone live. We haven't promoted it yet. It's literally just gone live. So I had the film crew from Axiom come into my home. So you'll see me, and we were talking hybrid work. So it's around about a 1 hour interview on all things kind of hybrid from an adoption perspective. So Change Comms training. So that's now up online. I am presenting this afternoon at 4:30 to the Adelaide community for the user group. So if you do want to join, I'm actually going to be talking about, that hybrid learning and what it looks like now for our current workforce. So that will be this afternoon at 4:30 if you want to join. Okay. So then what's new in 365? Okay. We're ready to go. Background noise suppression for Mac and iOS. The new AI speech enhancements for Microsoft Teams so that it can optimize that sort of audio in the background. So that it's not, the picture has dropped off there, so I'm not sure what's going on. There is the new multitasking pane now from an iPad. So if you come in from an iPad, it's a little easier in terms of Microsoft Teams. You've got a few sad faces going on across this presentation, 3 in fact. Some of the things that have actually changed were, we've been waiting for the co-organiser role when it came to Microsoft Team, loving the fact that we got the co-organiser role for up to 10 people. The downside though is, and the one that I get asked about the most across all the organisations and all the training, is breakout rooms. And it is not included yet. Cross fingers we start to see some changes on that one, because that's a really big core one of people being able to set up breakout rooms and have co-organisers around that to start it. So you won't be able to manage the recordings. You won't be able to do anything around the attendance reports, which is also another one that I know we get asked a lot of. How do I get the attendance report for my, consultant, my whoever? Okay, so that one, great, but a few little sad things. We have being able to disable chat across the board for anyone that's an anonymous or an unauthenticated user. So that can be done from the back end. So IT can actually turn it off. So important for you to note, especially for training when it comes to, and if it's turned on for your end users, because it's like, no, they can't chat, and they're going to probably wonder what's going on. Why is chat disabled, and how do I fix it in the options? But it could potentially be across the board. They're doing that, especially across Gov. There's a lot of places when it comes to Gov doing that, and in that finance sector around there, when they talk about it being kind of potential data leaks through chat. Okay. You've now got that whole, in terms of your closed captioning, So a few things actually happening there when it comes to on the web. Okay, so this is more about the web version. Live caption transcript for team meetings on the web as well. Hello, welcome. Speaker Coach, I have talked about this, it was a little while ago, embedding it into Microsoft Teams. So that is now coming through into Teams so that you can get that sort of live speech coach. If you haven't seen it before, go and have a look in PowerPoint. You can do your speaker coach in PowerPoint to be able to help you. So it will have a live help in terms of speaker coach speaking too fast, which I always do. Speaking too fast, you might want to slow down. So it will do a live support. That's when you actually do a load of PowerPoint live, by the way. So it's not when you share your screen. So it's PowerPoint live. Yeah. Okay, so this one, you may have seen it already pop up where it's joined with a meeting ID code now. So you get a code and password. So you can do that. You'll get it through Outlook. You'll see in the very top, I haven't got my proper clicker to zoom in on you for your suit, sorry, but over on the top right side of Teams, and then joining the meeting through your desktop, whether it's through the web or your mobile phone. So you've got that similar experience actually flowing through across the board with the meeting ID and passcode. There are some usability improvements when it comes to notifications on an Android as well. Teams chat with self. We really like this one. There's been a few interesting components out there. Some have, some haven't got it, and others are going, you can just do this. It's like, no, we can't. So it's been one that's been waiting. You know, we've often been doing things like creating a team meeting and going into a team meeting to do notes, to do a chat with ourselves, to capture sort of things inside Teams. But now it's actually rolling out to do a chat with self. You have now, there's a whole heap going on in terms of e-signatures too, by the way. So depending on what kind of e-sign technology you've got, they're embedding it inside Teams so you can stay in Teams and not leave Teams. And they've now got it through the mobile phone as well. So there's lots of changes happening across the e-sign space inside Teams. And then also the approvals through chats and channels. So you can actually do it through a chat and channel too. You can now open your PDFs inside Teams without having to go externally to open and edit. So they're all kind of the embedding depending on what your PDF, like if it's Adobe or whatever, so it's embedding in a little bit more. In terms of chat and collaboration, it's now got some groupings coming in based on, you know, things like team owners. So you can actually mention groups of people. We can go in terms of your call history and actually be able to remove from call history, but it will still be there in the log in the back end. Okay, so for you, you can remove it, but you know, it's for retention and all that sort of stuff. It will be available. Modern meeting calls. So in terms of the Teams web client, there are some changes coming around sort of Chrome and Edge to be able to have that bit more dynamic and the views and a few other things happening in terms of the web experience there. Now, this one is a little bit more around the user reporting. So if you do any of sort of the analytics, as often we tend to do across the adoption space, the reporting that was going on between what was in Teams and what you were getting in the reports in the administration sort of side out in the main admin, some of the things kind of weren't the same and connecting properly and different kind of information. It's now going to be one kind of unified experience depending on where you go. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, there is some more documentation around those kind of metrics and what's coming up for us. Whiteboard, you can now do your Bing image search for Whiteboard to be able to drop in images. And I will thank the only person online, Ryan McCracken, who actually managed to get a GIF and show us. I did a lot of searching to try and find something to get an image for you. Okay, the quizzes. So being able to convert from PDF to Word and then being able to load these sorts of things into your quizzes. It's quiz only, by the way, but you can actually do an import effectively of, especially of those Word documents and bringing them in to forms for you. So we're particularly liking that. It does give you a bit of a helping hand as well as to, you know, what it would look like or how you might actually work with it as you're starting to import things in. So it gives this whole import guidance and starts to sort of list things that might be going wrong if you do continue to go, okay? When it comes to forms, there is that we've talked about the changes coming for the portal on that welcome screen. One, there's the welcome screen has actually changed. I haven't put a screenshot up of the new welcome screen, but I have done that. If you've already got forms, what does it look like when you go in? Because there's a ton of new templates that are rolling out when it comes to forms to be able to support you. So they're coming fairly soon. They will come up with a, explore the different types of forms. It will be dependent on, like if you're in the education space, for example, it will give you specific ones that are a little bit more aligned to education when it comes to templates, for example. But there are some great ones that are flowing through where it's got pre-built questions. And a lot of the times in the past, it had some really great kind of AI in the background that the moment you gave it a name, it said, if I was doing a training survey, it'd go, you might want to ask all these type of questions, for example, and you could just pre-populate it. Whereas that's now flowing through into a whole template that you can just pick and choose from. Okay. Now, what's coming to OneNote? Last month, I did put a link in terms of what was happening in terms of the Windows 10 OneNote. I've just done a screen capture for you of all the various components that are changing there. As we're starting to get to the point where, over within that sort of next year or so, we see the merger of the two, the Windows, the UWP version of OneNote, and then that whole older desktop version, which is all kind of coming all into a line, so they are merged together. So we're still seeing some changes happening across there. So I've put both these in. You can have a little bit of a look through. The presentation is available for you. So Yammer topics. Now, if you have the license for Yammer topics, by the way, so you have to have the license for it, there is some ways now that that's actually kind of coming together to give a consistent experience across Yammer. Okay, so that's coming through. It is in preview release at the moment. Excel. I've talked a little bit about some of the changes. There are some mass changes going on across Excel. There's lots of movement every single month at the moment, whether you're on the web version or you're on your desktop version. The ones that I particularly like is for the web, the sheet protection for the web. And then the one I love for Windows is the data from inside a picture. That one I'm particularly loving. We've kind of had it a little bit for, I suppose, OneNote and be able to do that kind of right click on a picture and get text from a picture. This is kind of taking it now over into Excel to bring it into an Excel sheet. So I do like those features. Recommended pivot tables. Now, I have talked about this in the past, but there is a blog out now. It gives you a little bit more detail around what that's actually looking like when you start to dive into your pivot tables. So there's some bit of a screen redesign, and as well as, with some of those pop-ups. So if you do have content around that, some changes there. SharePoint. Look, there's always lots going on across OneDrive and SharePoint. The intra-zone guys do a great job in terms of Mark Cashman and the team. So a few things that are going on. There are some awesome SharePoint templates coming out around inclusivity, diversity, for example. So they've got the LGBTQ community team kind of SharePoint template, I should say, get that right, SharePoint template that you can just plug in. There's a couple more that are coming, some that were very specific for the US kind of, environment, but the ones that I did particularly like was around Disability Week and that sort of inclusivity that are coming here. So the Disability Employment Awareness and International Day of Persons with Disability are the two that are coming in. You could just be dropping in to your tenant in terms of SharePoint, and it's all sort of prefabricated with everything you need. Yep. So what it's got is it's pre-supplied with links and kind of web parts in it. So those web parts will lead to certain content online where can you go to get more information around. That's generally how Microsoft will build those kind of things. So you can just do a plug in. So it's usually you go to the likes of GitHub, for example, and you can pull down the pack and then push it into your environment, and you might put it underneath HR, for example, and have it as a link for HR around all things. You will be, as a rule, you can customize those web parts and put in your own as well, as a rule. But we haven't had it rolled out. We haven't seen it. It's coming till we get a chance to really play around with it. But a good one if you haven't got it and you're a smaller organisation and you wish to. So thanks for the question. Okay. Inline play in terms of SharePoint, when it comes to videos, there are the hero web parts. to be able to support. So we're seeing that coming in more and more, those sort of hero web parts. So it will then embed, and you can also display a lot of your own content with those hero web parts around video. Okay, so this is sort of no longer, a video will no longer kick off and go over to stream to play. It's playing in line. It's not kind of pushing you somewhere else. Other SharePoint page improvements. So when you're having some content coming in, it was sort of automatically redoing some of the flows. This is sort of changing around. You can give it a little bit more around where you want that flow to go. There's also some more room when it comes to Microsoft Teams and you wanted to edit. It was difficult because it was quite small, but it's giving it more room now to be able to edit within Teams if you've got a page. So there's some of those features coming. Logo management across SharePoint. So we can kind of play around a little bit more when it comes to those logo. You can change the look settings. Another one in terms that's kind of going away was inside look. So if you've ever had a bit of a hover over and had information, the inside look, it is going. Okay, so it is no longer going to be available. I personally think it's because we've got topics flowing in, and that when you hover over, you're going to have topics, although, topics is a bit of an extra license piece. So they're kind of eliminating some for the others. That's kind of my assumption, but doesn't mean that it's actually true. It's the only thing I can kind of attribute it to. But yeah, I was a bit disappointed to see that one go, and there's, one or two others along those lines. OneDrive for the web, opening text files now goes directly into the text editor without having to open. Okay, so, and Chrome there across other devices, but it's now there for the Android too. Am I hearing noise or is it just me? Oh, it's just me. Right. It's all good. I thought maybe on my phone had come off mute. I'm very good at doing that. File browsing in Teams. So the experience is actually changing to the OneDrive experience, which kind of the naming is a little confusing because people might think, if you look at it, that it's actually OneDrive and your files are now sitting, kind of files aren't SharePoint, they're OneDrive, but it's actually just more the experience as to what it looks like when you open up. So it's a file look experience when it comes to the navigation. Okay, so if you had gone through your files and you were doing OneDrive, it came up with a specific type of look, they're flowing that over into SharePoint. So you'll have the same. Okay. Adding OneDrive to Teams. So you can actually put OneDrive, a folder, into your files in SharePoint into Teams. So you can have it linking directly in. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a SharePoint folder. You can now have your OneDrive folders coming in to be able to access in terms of your most frequent, and they will keep syncing and up to date. Renaming shortcuts. I think I have talked about this one before. It is now out, so you can rename those shortcuts. Either that or I've just seen it so many times now. I feel like I've spoken about it before. Accessing your standard and private channels when it comes to SharePoint and being able to see them. So this has been changing around a little bit in terms of the interface and the look and feel, so that you've kind of got them all to be able to see and work with when you go open in SharePoint. So if you're in Teams, you'll then be able to, the display of it is just changing a little bit there. So you can see what's standard in its association. So what is in the channel, but what's the site library? Because it used to be, your channels, and it had files then, folders that were kind of outside of the channels, which made it kind of confusing because you haven't got channels effectively aligned to the folders in its structure. So they're separating it out to make it really clear channels, and these are just the library, site library folders. Okay? So that's kind of what's happening there. You might need to do some changes in terms of training and what it looks like. Your one-time passcode, the email's actually changing for that one-time passcode. So if you've got screenshots as part of your training, when you have that, you got the password ID, and so it's a no reply email. So that's had an update. Okay. Lists, approval integration into the SharePoint list, and some additional filters that are coming through. There is a blog that's gone up, a great blog by Mark Cashman around the list templates that are available inside lists, I recommend it. In terms of the what's coming, some of those sort of additional filters are things like conditional formatting. So I'm liking the conditional formatting. And with some of these changes that are flowing through, it's kind of putting a bit more of a nail into Planner in a lot of respects. There's some, awesome stuff that's really flowing through into lists, including some of those notifications and automation around putting it onto task lists and having notifications. So automation there flowing in as well. And Microsoft Stream, there's some changes really happening around Microsoft Stream. I've put a video in here of I'll come to it next, where there's a lot happening over the next couple of months. Inside OneDrive and SharePoint, you were not able to kind of do much with that kind of file. It was classed as Stream and sitting in your OneDrive or SharePoint, but you couldn't really do anything, not like you used to be able to in Stream. So those features are starting to now flow through into OneDrive and SharePoint. So you can actually go up into the top right-hand corner, click on the eye, for example, go into your video settings, and then you can start to have those features and functionalities to be able to change directly in your OneDrive and SharePoint now. Okay, so that's kind of flowing through in that environment. So that's something that's going to be coming soon. There is, I do particularly like this in terms of insights in the Viva Insight space. The inline suggestions that are coming through, there's a ton of different inline suggestions that I am particularly liking. Now, it is an add-in in terms of Viva Insights. So if you haven't actually rolled out that add-in around Viva Insights into Outlook, you may not get it, but it's got all these inline suggestions coming through. Things like when you send a mail, you're going to send this and it's outside of work emails. Or do you want to book some time? Okay, so all these little kind of drop downs and inline suggestions. And the one that I know has been asked for a really long time is you can actually track email open rates. That whole, for marketing teams and things like that that are wanting to kind of do a bit of tracking, some of that information is now starting to flow through into Outlook. It's one that's going to be particularly loved that's coming through from Viva Insights. So keep an eye out on that one. And if you do need to look at some configuration, I've got the details there for you. The Viva Topics in Teams chat flowing in, but you must have the Viva Topics license to be able to see that, of course. Bringing your own content into the Microsoft Teams Learning tab. So this one is, one of those ones that's been asked for a while. There is still some limitations, of course, around that and who are the providers that you can actually work with when it comes to learning. But this is a big one because it's then going to support all these different file types. So that's one that we've been kind of waiting on. There's a lot of changes coming down the line for Viva Learning, by the way, so keep an eye out on this space. When it comes to pathways and learning and the plugging in, there's some pretty big designs going on across Viva Learning for those that are into the change, training, adoption space. Customizing that metadata for your SharePoint content. So when it comes to being able to work across that, it helps when it comes to the Viva Learning. So this is all kind of part of that Viva Learning space. So when you do bring that content in, you can actually work with the metadata to be able to help and support you and set a few things up across Viva Learning. So it's flowing through. The SCORM content. Now you can load up SCORM content for your Viva Learning. However, there are some limitations in regards to that. Only version 1.2 will actually be supported, but it's not doing anything like tracking. So if you want to track, have they completed it, for example, the due or none of that, not like an actual learning platform at this point, none of that for the learning platform. So if you can load the SCORM in, but that's pretty much kind of it for your click through. Not a lot of that back end that you might get with an LMS. Okay. So in terms of that SCORM content, go forward. Viva Learning, it's seem to be doing that twice. Okay. Auto-generating thumbnails as well for Viva Learning. So if you don't put a thumbnail in, it will auto-generate a thumbnail for you to be included. Okay. So that's whether it's from you or those third-party LMS providers that you can plug in. Microsoft Editor, okay, available across more platforms. So we've had, Editor available in a few different places. When it came, now the main one in terms of Outlook, it's it's been there on some, but not on others, and not everything. We're starting to see some real flow through when it comes to Microsoft Editor. It is, and I have now turned it on. You can download kind of like a little pack for Edge as well. So it's got Editor for Edge to be able to help and support you too. There are other things in terms of, if you haven't actually had a look at what Editor does, if you go into some of the proofing, like if you go, for example, in Word, you go File, Options, you go into Proofing and Settings, for example. In those settings, it's got all the things that it'll do in terms of Editor. And if you haven't turned on, put on things like gender neutral for inclusivity, so that when you do your editor, it will actually help you around some of your language. Okay, so if you haven't turned it on, it's a good one to turn on for accessibility and inclusivity. There's lots happening there. Now with Outlook, there's a bit going on. I mean, we've seen that there's going to be some real changes across the interface. There's some other stuff going on now in regards to being able to find things like events and having them actually come up in terms of occurring series occurrences and those sorts of things. And some of the notifications that are coming through around at mentioning. So there's some new notification pane delivering these alerts. The RSVP options, okay. This one I was really looking forward to. It's really sad. It states in the message center that it's been coming. It's changed. It's got a changed and update to it. But when you actually go over to the roadmap, it says it's cancelled. So I really hope that it's not just changed and moved out like they say on one, and not actually cancelled, because I was really looking forward to this, especially for that hybrid piece. So yeah, that was another little sad face. I've got 3 sad faces this month, a few things that have, you know, come through. Mind you, there've been so many changes in the last year. I'm kind of not surprised. There is a blog that's gone out in regards to some of the Loop components that is actually going on, some of the changes and how it's coming into Outlook. Highly recommend going and have a look at this particular blog post. There's lots of sort of videos in there around the various components across Microsoft Teams and Outlook and what it looks like. It's in preview in Outlook at the moment. We've had it rolled out in Teams, but it's preview. So if you're on the Insider, you'll be able to see it, or you can always go and have a look at Darryl Webster's content or his user group when it comes to the Loop user group, and they've got lots of content over there focused on Loop. Okay. Cameo in PowerPoint Live. Been really looking forward to this one flowing through. Having your PowerPoint and embedding the video into your PowerPoint, and you can do all sorts of fun graphics and things going on around the video into PowerPoint. So when you go to Teams, it will embed your video in. The downside and one of those limitations is if you are recording, it will not show in your recording, okay? It's not going to show in the recording. So, which is a kind of disappointing, because you got it all here and it looks pretty. It's just going to be a blank space in your presentation, effectively. So it's not going to show up in the recording. Maybe in the future. There are some new quick access features across the Android to be able to help you. There is, in terms of Word, like how you want to, okay, applying, okay, reviewing and applying and tracking and changes and things like that. So that's that drop down. There's the new features there in terms of working on a document. There is an example record that you can import into your data workbook if you actually want to see some of the features about how, when you bring information in, what it will look like when you start to bring in this data into your, I'm trying to remember, I'm playing around with that one. I did go and have a look. Use an example record to import data to your workbook. I'm trying to remember that one. I know I was playing around with it, but I did a lot of playing around in the last 48 hours. All right, okay. Now, events and conferences and things that are actually coming up. I've reduced down some of the lists that are going on around the US, the DEX. We still haven't got the announcement of it going live in September yet to be able to register. There is the Digital Workplace Experience 2022, what's going on a lot of the dates that are virtual conferences, things that you might like to actually join in. There's sort of lots happening online. Comms versus just, kind of just being on. So there should be some great recordings if you want to see some of the recordings potentially out of Commsverse. Of course, the Yammer one, I will repeat this one again from last month. You have been in here, guys, so I promise I've been supporting you. This is your Yammer Festival for 2022 coming up in December. We'll have that, hopefully that registration before too long. We'll see what that looks like when it comes through. Now, where are we at? Sorry, I know we've probably gone a little over today, but all good. Our guest speakers, we actually have SWOOP that have come in. They have their latest insights to their benchmarking report around Microsoft 365. I will let them dive in and explain. We have with us today, we have Dr. Laurence Lock Lee. Thank you very much for coming in. So we have someone here in person, but online we also have Emily and Sharon to be able to present. So I will kind of move the screens around and we'll do a bit of changes in terms of presenting. Now, did you need to come up first?
No, Emily.
Emily is going to, rightio, Emily, I'll let you take control of the screen. There we go. Let's just maximize it for everyone here.
Great.
Let's just go full screen. There we are.
Excellent.
Thank you, guys.
How's the audio there for me at the moment?
Awesome.
Cool. All good. Okay, this is a very different experience for me. This is my first sort of hybrid event where I'm joining on the online side. So I wish I could be there with those of you who are there face to face today. So today we'll be, as Kirsty mentioned, we will be walking through some of the key findings from our M365 Benchmarking Report, which we launched last month. So before I get into the content here today, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. I am joining from the Central Coast today, so I'd like to acknowledge the Darkinjung people. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to anyone who is logged into today's session or present in the room today as well. This is just a bit of a quick agenda. Of course, I'll just briefly introduce myself and some of our speakers as well, and who SWOOP is if you haven't heard of us before. We also have a quick poll question we'd like to ask you just to understand what some of the challenges are that you're facing in your organisation, and then how some of the findings from the benchmarking report will line up with some of those challenges that you're facing. We also have some case study options. Of course, we have Laurie there in person today who'll be talking through the key findings, and we'll also show you how it's reflected, how you can also measure this yourself using SWOOP for M365. I know that we do have the chat running in today's session, so if you do have any questions throughout today, please pop your questions in the chat, and then Laurie, I'm sure you can help to field any questions that are coming from within the room as well. So for those of you who haven't heard of SWOOP before, I know we have had the pleasure to present within this forum a few times before. So some of you may be familiar with us. Some of you may also be SWOOP customers. So it's great to see you. So we're in the business of analytics, of course, and specifically around collaboration analytics. And SWOOP provides real-time analytics dashboards for Yammer, for Microsoft Teams, and also for M365 more recently, hence why we've released this really great piece of research, which we'll be talking to today. So we sort of see ourselves as kind of like a fitness tracker for your collaborative health across those different platforms. And we sort of help to also show you what good looks like through the benchmarking studies that we run every single year. There's a few different, I guess, pillars to SWOOP and the way that we break it down. So we're definitely the experts, and we have the authority to talk on what good looks like across Teams and Yammer and M365. And it's also awesome that Microsoft look to SWOOP for those insights each year when we release these studies. We're a Microsoft partner, and we're trusted advisors to some incredible organizations across the globe. There's the benchmarking element, of course, which is what we'll be deep diving into today. And then we also collaborate with some universities as well, where we look at how collaboration can have an impact on overall performance as well. And if you're interested in any of that research as well, I'd strongly encourage that you visit the SWOOP Analytics website, That's also where you can download the M365 Benchmarking Report for free, and of course to access all of the great case studies that we have with organisations all over the world as well. So next thing we wanted to head into was this quick poll. So for those of you who are joining us online, you can head to menti.com on your device, or you can possibly use the QR code there if it's working. If you're in the room, you'll have to use the QR code, or you can also head to menti.com on your device. And we have a quick question that we'd like to ask you, and that is, what are your organisation's biggest digital collaboration sins? And those sins will show up on the screen in just a moment when I show you and move across onto Menti. So I'll just give you all a quick moment to jump onto Menti on your device. So menti.com with that code that's on the screen, or you can just go direct through the QR code. So I'm going to navigate across now, if you just give me a brief moment. And we can see there are already some votes coming in, which is great to see. So you can see those filtering through now. And we have had the opportunity to ask these questions to a few other different forums as well. And it's interesting to see that a lot of these results are quite consistent across the board when we're looking at this poll. So we're wanting to know, are you suffering from email overload? Is it meeting overload that seems to be front of mind at the moment? As we move into more of the hybrid working and as you're embracing Microsoft Teams more, do you find that chat interruptions seem to be an issue that seems to pop up a little bit more? We also look at things like how you work on files, if you're working within OneDrive more so, or if you're working in more of those open collaborative spaces like SharePoint. If you're using Yammer or Enterprise Social to connect across the organisation, and how much that is happening, or if there's a lack of that happening at the moment. And then we also like to have a look at those sort of best practice meeting habits, things like having your camera switched on for online meetings, and also around sharing content. So great to see, well, not necessarily great to see. I'm sorry that you're suffering from email overload and meeting overload, but these results are definitely consistent with what we're hearing, and also some of the key themes that have come through in the benchmarking. And I want you to think a little bit about, as Laurie will talk to the key findings in just a moment, I want you to think about the findings that resonate for you in your role and also for your organisation, and which of those insights might be interesting to take back to your team and to look at as sort of big opportunities. And there are a lot of opportunities is what we've found looking at the data. So thank you for everyone for participating in that quick poll. I will navigate back into the slides again. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Laurie, who's actually live in the room.
Okay, let me just, I should have done all of this before. I'll hand you the microphone to clip on. And if you want to take over, I've got your presentation here if you do wish to.
Oh, no, I can have a look at, I can see it up here. This is novel for me. I haven't done a hybrid sort of virtual. I'm usually in the virtual, so, and Emily was going to be here too, but she got flooded in. So she's going to change the slides virtually while I'm physically here. Work that out. Oh no, I think Emily, are you running the slides? Or
Yes, I'm running the slides. So unless Kirsty might run the slides from there.
Yeah, I can actually run them from here because you stopped sharing your. I know you're still sharing your screen.
Oh, do you need me to stop sharing now?
I can. I've got it all here set, ready to go.
Okay.
Oh, really?
The next one.
Next one. Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh,
and there's your
no.
there.
Oh, just back
yeah,
one more.
okay. This is the clicker, so I can.
Yeah.
So I can go back one to say.
There we go.
Okay, so a little bit about the study and the sort of way we do our benchmarking. So we don't run surveys. Basically, we look at what everybody's doing. So we actually mine the digital traces. So what you're actually doing. Why that's important is that during COVID, you've seen a lot of surveys, right? And certain sorts of people answer surveys and certain sorts of people don't answer surveys. And what we found is that there's an awful lot of people that don't answer surveys, right? So this is quite a unique study in a way, because we're looking at the whole organisation, who's doing something and who's not doing anything. So we had something like over 200,000 accounts, but those accounts included guest accounts. So if we take the guests out, we're down around, I think it was about 113,000 company accounts. We looked at the groups. So we used the directory, the Active Directory, the organisation. We developed the groups based on those. So we had nearly 4,000 groups across 18 organisations. And they're fairly well spread. There was quite a mix of organisations, but this is our first. So, we've still got a way to go yet before we get up to our normal benchmarking. So with Yammer, we've got well over 100, something like that. Now, what we are benchmarking, typically people look at activity levels, right? And of course, we do report activity levels, but we felt it was much more important to think of how people actually work. So we developed these 7 habits. And in fact, the Menti poll that you did had the 7 habits, if you like. You were commenting on those 7 habits. So what you see up here is the 2, the email liberated and asynchronous collaborator, are actually the email overload in the meeting sort of overload, if you like. The chat liberated was the next one there, which is pretty much being locked in chat rather than using the other asynchronous channels. We had the file share, which was really SharePoint versus OneDrive. Community contributor, that's Yammer versus Teams. And the screen sharing and camera confidence are basically habits within the sort of online meetings. So we measure those, and we measure them as ratios. We don't say that you shouldn't have your camera on, and we don't say that you shouldn't use email, but we do measure the balance between email and asynchronous Teams channels and Yammer. So, and the same with chat and so forth. So this is what we measured for those, 2,000, well, actually 113,000 people. Right? So, and what do we find? So this is just a quick summary of the overview of the findings. First one we call is all the gear and no idea. Right? So basically, this is saying that Microsoft 365 is an incredibly rich, and of course you've been sitting here listening to Kirsty, so it's incredibly rich, right? So how much of that is actually being used? What we found was that, in terms of just online meetings, looking at the time people spend in meetings, the busiest sort of 10% accounted for nearly 50%. I think it was 42% of all that time. Right? But the bottom 50% only accounted for 6% of that time. So we hear about the busy people, right? They're the ones that, are overloaded and they're stressed. And of course, we need to care about them because often they're the leaders in organisations. But what about the other 50% that are hardly even interacting at all? And I'm starting to call them, the digitally disconnected, right? So we need to know they don't fill in surveys, remember? So you don't hear about them. They're sort of hidden. Right. The next one is related to that because we see that the most effective asynchronous channels is the Teams channels and the Yammer discussions, right? Because the discussion's persistent. You can go back in there and find out. You can be a new person. You can jump in and see what's been going on. You can't do that in chat. You can't do that in email, right? So unfortunately, they're the least used communication modes. 14% of staff post a message in Yammer, but actually 80% read something, right? So that's sort of good for Yammer, but we want to see more active participation in Yammer. Only 27% posted a Teams channel message. And I might say the reason for that is that a lot of people aren't even in a digital team, right? You need to be in a digital team before you can post something in a channel, right? So if you're not in one, you're not participating in that. So that the most useful asynchronous channels, most people aren't using. The next one, in terms of chat, we are seeing this movement of people from email to chat. They're saying email's bad, we can't find anything, it's all over the place. So they've moved into chat. Now, in some ways that's sort of good because it's more immediate and you're more likely to get some sort of attention. But the other side is it's bad because it interrupts people. You can't find anything. It's sort of like, so the interruption effect we see is quite dramatic, in fact. So 65 Teams chat messages per week on average. There were people with thousands of chat messages a week, right? So they're living in it, so, but of course there's still that big tail of people not doing anything, right? So, but nevertheless, when you compare that with the 29 emails per week, sort of, it is starting to take over, but we see that as jumping from the frying pan into the fire, right? You need to go from email to channels or Yammer, not email to chat, in our view. And of course, there is a place for chat, and we talk about that in the report, but not in anything that you want to sustain and make persistent and find again. Teams collaboration habits vary widely. Now, this is a big one because, if there was anything that I did find in the data was that there's a huge variation in how people use the M365, and it does impact the way you collaborate. And I'll show you a slide a bit later there. That's quite interesting from that. We did do a financial analysis. We actually adopted a method that one of our customers sort of was doing, and they were trying to make a business case for why we should do more collaboration outside of email. And he called himself the nerd from Atlanta, and you can think about some big beverage company that works out of there. Well, he gave us the sort of method, and we just converted that using some of the Microsoft Insight, Viva Insights conversion factors from activity to time. And when you actually do the calculations, we came up with an average of 26 minutes a day people could save in not using email or meetings mostly, and using the asynchronous channels. And if you put dollar amounts against that, they'd add up to an awful lot of money, right? So we've got the method in the report. So if you feel that you need to make a business case to support, teaching people how to operate more effectively digitally, then this is another way of adding something to the argument, especially if you've got financial type people that want to hear those things. Leaders. This is an interesting one. I felt that when we were at the beginning of COVID and hybrid, that the most disenfranchised people were the middle managers, right? So these are the people that are used to managing in the office. And then everybody went home all of a sudden, and I've heard stories, and I talked to middle managers that said, look, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm sending messages out to my team. They're just not replying and things like that. I used to be able to just go and tap them on the shoulder, but this isn't happening. I think the good news from this data is that they have learnt over these 2 years as to how to work digitally. So they have actually stepped up to the mark. I don't see that. I thought they would be a lot worse, frankly, than the general population. But in fact, they are better. And I'm looking to try and do some analysis over time to see how that might have helped. And the way we did that was we just pretty much took the key words from their role, from the Active Directory, the ones that were management type keywords. They were in the report. We just separated them out into a group, and then we analysed their collaboration scores with their habits against the rest who were non-managers. And then finally, I guess what we're saying is that, once you've found out, how you're collaborating or how you're not collaborating, how do we change that behaviour? And the only way we can see that happening is for getting that continuous feedback. Kirsty showed a little bit about what Insights is trying to do in the moment. When you're about to do something, there's a little bit of a hint, and we're trying to do the same sort of thing with SWOOP 365, giving you a little nudge, at certain times when you can see what your collaboration patterns are like. So, so the digitally disconnected, I talked about this just to give it, this is just sort of showing you, what that data looks like. So 18% did not participate in a single meeting over a 6-month period analysed, right? So, so to me, in that period, this is up to the end of March, 6 months. So up to the end of March. So clearly people weren't working in the office regularly then. So, so that's a big result. This is just showing you there is this huge tail of people not really doing a lot, but top ones over 2,500 chats a week, right? So, but on average 65. So it's still a lot. It's a lot of chat and a lot of interruptions. Now this is becoming our signature slide now, and it looks. Let me sort of walk you through it. What I did was I plotted we got the 3,000 groups, right? I think there's 3,500 groups, right? I plotted the average performance, their digital habit performance for each group, and then I also plotted it against the variation within the group, right? So the variation is this bottom axis, and their performance is in the top. And interestingly, you can see that the top of the least variation within those that were right at the top, performing really well, but also down at the bottom. And when I saw this, I thought, wow, that looks sort of odd, doesn't it? You'd expect some sort of linear pattern, but in fact, what we're finding is that the thing that is unified amongst those at the bottom is that they just don't do anything. right? When you looked at the data, they weren't, these whole groups weren't doing anything digitally at all. But the ones at the top, each of the team members had good habits. Now think about teams that you've been in digitally, where some of you are trying to do the right thing. Some people are stuck in email, refusing to interact at all digitally or what have you. What does that do to the productivity of your team? It's pretty clear variation hurts your ability as a team to work. Now, my takeaway from this is that it tells you a journey, right? It says that if you're way down here, you're not doing anything. You've got teams that are basically disconnected. What do you do with them? You've got to move them up to the top. What I'm seeing is that they're moving through a journey of first going through the painful period where some of your team members are actually learning how to collaborate, but there's some laggards in those groups. So you've got this tension within groups, and these groups are here. They're trying to perform better. Some people in the team are performing better and some aren't. But when they hit a tipping point, which is around the halfway mark, then all of a sudden the leaders start to be the critical mass and they can start to bring the rest of the team on. So in terms of training and education, there clearly needs to be a lot of education from what we can see. These ones down the bottom where most of the groups are, they just need a general lift. The ones at the top, really the coaching should come in here and sort of say, well, how can we help the leaders bring their laggards within their teams forward, within their groups? The other thing to take away from this, I think, is that training and education should be done within those groups, right? So rather than just have the course out there on a web link and say go and join up and learn, I think the peer pressure within the group will help the group come together as a team. So I think it's very important to do group-based training. I think at this early stage, they need to be educated on nearly everything. But if they're educated as a group, they can learn from each other.
Can I just confirm? So based on what you were saying, you had senior leaders are actually the top level actually collaborating quite well.
Quite well
but
now.
They're not bringing their team on the journey. So they're sort of kind of being.
Well, some of them might be line managers, right? Yeah. So you might find that some of these teams, they might have a line manager sitting above them, but within the team itself. So this is like the hierarchy in the Active Directory, right? So the people that are partway down are line managers, they might not actually be in an operating team. They might be in a management team, and that might be picked up here, but the bulk of the teams are down the bottom of the hierarchy, aren't they? That's just the way it works. So
I mean, I've been saying years since even right back 5-6 years ago when it started, that don't train as individuals, train as a group. I'm still seeing a lot of that flowing through with what organisations are asking us, training organisations to do. Push back and do through training, use the report if you need to push back on why you want to go to where the groups are. Because I've been saying it for a very long time, and if you can even talk it to being workshopping rather than training, it will then apply.
And do it the in-place groups, right? Not just get the cohort together from different places, get the people that have to work together, right? So because then you've got day-to-day peer-to-peer pressure. If it's just a training group, well, they go away after the training course, right? So I think it's very important that they go the journey together. And the case studies that Sharon will talk to, we've got case studies from some of those top groups, if you like, and we can see how they operate. And there's a vast difference between what they're doing and what the bottom levels are doing, or even the middle levels are doing. From what I've seen, there's just a huge opportunity. Do you have a question or?
Depending on, I guess, the nature of like you mentioned, it makes more sense if the peer pressure and you're collaborating on a daily basis. So, for example, is that, and I'm talking to the university's internal committee, we moved from this haphazard, slightly chaotic way of doing things, hopping between channels to centralising things. Into an actual Teams channel with like sort of the little sub channels, and we all agreed once we got this prototype that we were going to start engaging with. What were the rules of engagement and when to use what at what time? So we were all on board, I guess, from day dot, and we're a group of 10 people.
Yep.
So. And we work with each other in some capacity every single day.
Yep.
But with this variation, might have a group that has like 30 people from various different groups, and maybe the actual rules of engagement and the purpose of why you're there and why you've been added is unclear. So I guess what I would like to know is your data in any way analysing changes of effectiveness of group behaviour based on the size of the group?
Yep.
Like, you know, so once we got to 20 people in a group, people stopped sort of engaging like day to day because it sort of became a little bit too public. Whereas if you're in a really tight team with under 20 people, you know each other.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because when you look at organisational design, people typically develop a hierarchy, right? And the smallest group is the groups when they get down to the leaves, if you like. What I found in the groups that we had, the leaves, they weren't that big, you know. I mean, obviously there were ones with 30 or 40, but on average they were probably in the 10 to 20. Interestingly, when we did the teams benchmarking, the average team size was 28. Right? So when people built a team, which usually is looking at, you know, a mix of within your line or across functional, those teams were actually bigger. So it really comes down to how you design your structure in your organisational hierarchy. So you've got down to your team, that's 10. You know, the rule of thumb is no more than double figures in teams, otherwise it becomes harder to collaborate. So in essence, if you've got an organisational design that doesn't go far enough down, you know, then you are ending up with these big groups. And you're right, you're going to have more variation because you've got more people.
I also think it might be intimidating. It might be on a hierarchy. You want to engage in a team when you can only see
exactly.
echelon engagement.
Exactly. So there's two sort of teams, right? There's the sort of the day-to-day interaction teams, which should be the less than two double figures, so less than 10. We say, you know, 4 to 8 is an optimal team size. When you look at these big teams groups, they could easily be in Yammer, right? Because they're not really teams, they're not really working groups, they're actually a communication group. And you should treat them like that, you know, because so the line managers often, they'll be sitting on top of a group which would probably have 30, 40, even thousands, you know, sort of, in essence, what they want to do is communicate to people and get a little bit of feedback, but they don't want to have the sort of interaction that you guys have on a day-to-day basis. Exactly, it's communication with, you know, and that's sort of what Yammer does. Now there is you know, we debate a lot about where should you host your big groups. Right now, I think they should be in Yammer, right? But some people think, well, it's just more convenient to put them in Teams because we're not using Yammer. Of course, I can understand that. Technically, you can make it work. But for me, I like the idea of, you know, separating that day-to-day teamwork from the sort of communication type stuff and having it in a separate digital space, even though technically it might look the same. You feel like you're walking over somewhere else, right? You're walking away from your desk to the water cooler. You're not just sitting there and turning around and all of a sudden I've seen 30 people instead of 5 or something like that. So I think we still, you know, we're sort of writing a lot about that now because, you know, I think what we'd done before, we'd analysed teams that people had formed within Microsoft Teams, and we'd analysed communities in Yammer. But this is the first time we've looked at a hierarchy and looked at groups that are in your formal hierarchy, which covered, I think in the data, nearly 90% of the people were in a group somewhere. Whereas when we look at Teams and Yammer, we're only covering a fraction of the organisation. So in that way, this is the first for us that we looked at groupings. Now you could say, well, they're not really teams, they're just sort of co-located because it's convenient and all that sort of stuff, but someone made a decision that they should be a group and somebody higher up made that decision. So whilst they may not interact intensely sometimes, they are a group for a reason. So there is a reason to collaborate. I better move on because I talked a little bit about this calculation of what the savings could be, and really the saving in essence is the time that you take in you doing email, which is time consuming, and in fact reading email is our biggest habit, our biggest time consuming habit, and also in meetings. Now, a lot of the literature I read was saying, and I sort of believe it, is that 50% of the time you spend in meetings potentially could be done in other ways, offline, asynchronously, and what have you. Some said even more than that. Some were saying 80%, but I chose the 50%, and we did. And then in terms of email, we're not saying get rid of email, but we're saying conservatively, you can probably convert 20% of your email. Now, in my view, any email that's sent only internally shouldn't be done in email, right? So that 20% is probably conservative for most of you. If you're customer facing, or you're sort of facing outside, you might have to use email because your clients and your partners may not be on your own tenant. That'll change over time, but at the moment it's still email. But that's still pretty conservative. But these two here, we've actually got calculations for those. So, and as I said, 26 minutes, $70 million US for 10,000 strong company, which in the US is quite a modest sized company. So the time savings are there. This is just showing the leaders and the non-leaders. These are the keywords that I picked up out of the. So the 12,000 were classified as leaders, and 36,000 were the others. So I think it was encouraging that the leaders were actually performing better, getting their habits together and so forth. Now, if I look at the actual role names, I can actually see some roles that, the continuous improvement people I saw were very good. The leaders that were in sales and marketing tended to be not so good, right? Because they were probably in email, so forth still. But, so there's a little bit even understanding what sort of roles are actually better within the leadership. And I guess I'm handing over now. Is this right, Emily? Are you ready now?
I'll bring Sharon in now just to talk a little bit about some of the case study insights, and then after that, let's have a look at the dashboard.
Okay.
That's the last point. 40% of staff didn't participate in one-on-one. Are we saying that managers aren't actually doing their one-on-ones?
Well, if they're doing it face-to-face, we don't pick it up. But remember, in this period, virtual. So it's hard to think, well, there was no call, there was no meeting, there was 40% of people didn't have a digital signal. Exactly, it could be. Yeah, they could be using WhatsApp, but these are companies that have committed to Office 365, right? So and yeah.
I find that really interesting because I know that there's been a bit of a miss on some of that where I've had senior leaders ask them whether they one-on-one. Well, we kind of don't do too many of those because we're always in meetings now. So
yeah, but they're meeting with each other, right? They're not actually meeting with the digitally disconnected, aren't actually in those meetings, right? So, and then of course the one-on-ones could have been in the office. You can just go and have a chat with somebody. If they're not there to have a chat with, well, it doesn't happen, and that's what we're sort of saying. Maybe that's an overstatement a little bit, but even if it was 20%, it would scare you, wouldn't it? Question?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, so saying that leaders are collaborating.
Well, their digital habits are actually better. I think my speculation is that if they didn't learn how to collaborate or use the digital tools, they couldn't do their job. Right? So you just think about a manager who lived in the office and managed by walking around. All of a sudden, all the staff are gone. I sent emails to everybody, and they just didn't respond to me. Sort of not in the same way that when I was in the office. So they had to work it out. Otherwise, they couldn't do their job.
They're doing it well.
I think everybody can do better, frankly. I think everybody can do it better. There's just so much variation that I saw between the best and even not even the worst, the average. There's just so much that people can do with this. And when we look at the case studies of the high performers, there's just such a big difference in the sorts of things they're doing compared to others. Some of them are just inspiring. I've talked about salespeople sort of sending emails and interacting through this very, sort of formal sort of way. Well, we had case studies where people had their customers in the same team as them, chatting and doing and interacting in the same way as other members. Now, if you think about, your customers or some of the people outside your organisation that you've worked with and how you've been constrained in working and how long it took to get an email trail to some sort of conclusion, these people were getting it, within the day. That's a huge benefit, but it requires trust. It requires sort of, a maturation of how you work. So there are only some case studies at the moment, but it just shows you what's possible. Okay. Where are we, Emily?
I'll take it. Oh, here we go. We've got the slides.
Let's talk about the case studies, some of the case studies.
Well, thanks everyone, and thank you. Hi everyone. I'm in Canberra today, so I couldn't join you guys in Sydney. I'm sorry, but what we do in all our benchmarking reports is we identify what we call the collaboration champions. So as part of the M365 benchmarking, you might remember from the earlier slides, we had 18 organisations, and that equated to 3,773. We call them like departments, teams, groups, whatever we find in the Active Directory from M365. And the way that we ranked these organisations was looking at those 7 collaboration habits and combining all of those to come up with a ranking. So these organisations, some of their teams or departments were the highest ranking ones. So what's really beneficial for doing the benchmarking, and keep this in mind for your organisation if you'd like to do the same, we do keep everything anonymous. So obviously we've had permission from these organisations to name them. But by doing the benchmarking, we can actually identify your top performing teams. And that's what most of these organisations found really beneficial because, for example, there's one here, City Fibre, which is the UK version basically of the NBN. They do the full fibre networking across the UK. And they had so many poor performing teams, but they had one top team. It was in large size organisations. It was actually the number one out of the 3,700 or so. And what they were so interested in doing was us being able to showcase that particular team so that they can use that internally and see what best practice looks like within your organisation. And I think that's a really important thing that most organisations can do. RACQ is another good example. RACQ is the same, it's the Queensland NRMA or the Queensland RACV. So their top performing team was actually, it was retail stores. So they're the ones, that are in the shopping centres, and they're the frontline workers, I guess, the face of RACQ. And again, how awesome is that their top performing team is a frontline team? And when I spoke to them about, why are they doing so well? They said it's because obviously they're all geographically dispersed across the state of Queensland. So the only way that they communicate with each other is actually on M365. So I thought that was just such a great example. You can read more about them in the report. So yeah, the City Fibre one was a excellent example of. Can we move to the next slide, please, Laurie or Kirsty? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Laurie. Yeah.
No, it's me. It's me. We're sort of all involved in something. I've got the slides. Thanks, Sharon.
Oh, you're right. So another reason we love to do these case studies, and they're always part of the report, is it's great for Laurie and I to have a look at the data and see, what the data shows. But what does that actually look like in the real world? And also, how can the rest of us learn from what the data is telling us? So what we want to do obviously is identify these top teams and then go to these organizations and just listen to their stories. And that's what we've written up in these case studies. So Laurie touched on a lot of those things earlier about like external teams, for example. Engage Squared, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, they were one of the top performing teams, or it was their project management team actually. It was one of the top performers. In the report, there's some great examples there of how they always invite their guests into a team, and then the transparency right from the get-go of working out loud and exactly spelling out how we're going to work as a team and work with our customers. There's another great example there from a US, it's a US-based global real estate group. And the same thing, they said that they actually are building these closer relationships now with their clients than they did prior to working digitally. And so, prior to the pandemic, because they're sharing all their files, they're not sending emails, they're not actually physically traveling to a client's site because they're working together within teams every day. Great examples there. One of the things I wanted to touch on, which is in this slide, is Laurie did speak earlier about one of the key findings is that is about this variation in the team performance and mismatched collaboration within the teams. There's lots of stuff happening in the chat, and I couldn't quite hear the question asked, but I think it was along those lines too. So it's just that if people aren't aligned in their collaboration practices, how how do you have good performance overall with a team? So it's about aligning those things. But we also found that just making these really small changes can have a huge benefit and a huge impact on the business. And so I'm not sure whether any of you have heard of Syngenta, but they are the world's largest agriculture company. And so they do everything from, working in labs to farming practices, it's all about getting food on the table for all of us around the world. So what was interesting with their story, they had some teams and departments that topped some of the individual collaboration habits, but in the overall, when we combined all the 7 habits, they weren't at the top of any of the lists. Part of that can be explained because a lot of their users don't have full access to M365. So think about workers in China. I think that they said it was only might be Teams and Outlook, and their seasonal workers only have access to Outlook. So it brought down like their whole rankings, but they had some great examples of just making some small changes. So what they did during the pandemic, this is a workforce of about 40,000 people. They implemented these Work Better Wednesday sessions, and they're about a 2-hour session every Wednesday where they just basically handheld people through M365. So Kirsty, earlier on when you were talking about, all the updates, you can imagine people, I think some of the comments, if you can read them here, these were from people who'd attended these sessions. There's, as Laurie said earlier, all the tools, all the gear and no idea how to use them. So it was just this hand holding of, okay, today we're going to look at how, for example, down below you could see there how to block out time so you can focus on your work, and really enabling people to let them know that they don't have to be accessing email all day. It's, that's going to interrupt your working day. So this down the bottom, that screenshot was one of the Syngenta employees email sign off. So she has her inbox open from a certain time. Otherwise, get me on Teams or go to Yammer and find out the answer. Really simple things like that can have a huge impact, because when we go back and look at those ROI calculations that Laurie spoke about, we know that if you are doing a message in a Teams channel, it's saving you time rather than sending emails. So, doing that across an organisation with 40,000 people can have huge impacts and, really improve the business. So I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to head over to you, Emily, but I'll share in the chat the link, and we've got so many case studies, and I really encourage you to learn from the best in the business, and there might be just one thing that you can pick up and take away with, and, hopefully it'll make an impact for you.
All good, thanks, Sharon. So this is the case studies page that you can access on the SWOOP website to read through. Of course, those case studies are available in the report as well. So I'm sure you'll see a few times in the chat how to download the report, and we'll also have a link at the end of today's session as well. This is the last poll question that I wanted to ask. So if you do have your device, if you just open up Menti again, there'll be one final question open in there. And this is referring back to the findings that Laurie walked us through just earlier, and finding out which of the insights are most relevant for you. So it should already be open on your device. If not, just use that QR code again, or the code to log in on the screen, and I'll jump back across into Menti just now. And I think, yes, we can see that there are votes coming through just now. And we'll start to see which ones I think are resonating the most. So at the moment, the leading insight seems to be that small changes to collaboration habits will result in huge efficiencies, which is relating back to that sort of cost calculation and ROI when you are, very conservatively changing some of those habits, whether it be moving, 20% of your emails across into Teams channels or Yammer. Now we also have team members' collaboration habits vary wildly, which again is sort of referring back to that lovely boomerang type chart that Laurie spoke to, and also great to hear that there were some questions off the back of that visual as well. I know it usually it sparks a lot of discussion as well, so it's a really interesting one. But I guess there's also, it looks like across the board, there are, each of those insights do seem to be resonating with all of you. So thank you for participating in that last poll. But to wrap up today's session as well, and being SWOOP Analytics, we couldn't possibly finish today's session without showing you exactly how this is reflected in the dashboards and in the analytics. And that also ties in with that final insight that Laurie spoke to around, now more than ever, we need to be able to measure what this looks like in an organization. So this is just a really quick snapshot of what SWOOP for M365 looks like. This is just a demo version with some sort of dummy data. But if I can get you to think about what this might look like for yourself as an individual and the way that you use M365, maybe what it looks like for your direct teams and also potentially across your entire organization. So we have the different dashboards over here on the left-hand side. We go, all the way down to the individual level. You could have anyone potentially logging into these dashboards to see what their collaboration habits currently look like, which we find is a much more powerful, impactful way to look at your current collaboration, as opposed to just looking at those sort of high-level, volume-based, activity-based metrics, which aren't really telling you a very compelling story. So this is just looking at the personal dashboard at the moment and looking at my own habits potentially, but today we're looking at Frankie Swoopster's collaboration habits. So we have these different tabs here that you can look at. And as you first log in, you start to scroll down, you'll see your own collaboration score, which is an average of the different collaboration habits that we spoke to today. So just as Laurie was starting to get into the insights, you saw that lovely visual with the 7 collaboration habits. This is where you'll then have your score assigned based on how you line up with the SWOOP benchmarks as well. So for Frankie Swoopster, these collaboration habits, all of the scores are looking relatively strong. But as we could tell from a lot of the insights, these numbers aren't reflected exactly the same as what we're seeing across the board. We see there's much more, many more opportunities for us to improve these scores as well. So just to show you what that looks like, for example, on the email liberated measure, in terms of looking at how much you are over-relying on email, which is also tying back to that collaboration sin of email overload. If I click into view insights, this is where you can start to really see what that balance looks like for yourself as an individual, but then you could also see what this looks like across your broader organization, which could potentially be quite confronting to see. Now for email liberated, we can see for this particular user, they're sending on average, less than 1 email for every Teams channel Yammer message, which is placing them right at the top of that benchmark. So this is a great example of what good looks like. And we also have that sort of best practice benchmark built into the platform as well. So we know that people who are email liberated, they're sending less than 5 emails for every Teams channel or Yammer message. So when you start to reflect on your own habits, are you somebody who is maybe sending 20 emails for every Teams channel or Yammer message? Are you sending 200 emails? So this is also start to get you to think about how you can shift to these habits to become a better collaborator, making you more productive and more efficient in your roles across the board. And even just to quickly show you what this looks like for the asynchronous collaborator, which is tying up with that collaboration sin of meeting overload, you can then very quickly see how much time you spend in meetings for how much you are using more of those asynchronous ways of collaborating. So for this particular user, it's 37 minutes. Now, I'm just going to quickly jump into the enterprise dashboard as well. And now this is where you can see what those habits look like for your entire organization, including an overall collaboration score. And this is where you can start to sort of track over time and see where you're having those improvements to particular habits. So, you know, are we improving on the email liberated measure? If the biggest opportunity within your organization are the chat interruptions, then you can really start to focus in on how much you're over relying on chat as well. Same goes for all of the other measures as we scroll down further. Maybe it's some of those meeting habits that are the ones that are resonating and that are the biggest areas of opportunity. And that's when you can start to see, you know, how often people have camera on in meetings, how often people are screen sharing in meetings. And then you can also see at a glance what parts of the business are your top collaborators. And this is almost sort of like running your own internal SWOOP benchmarking and finding those best practice sort of internal case studies, similar to what Sharon mentioned for some of our top performers. You can see what that looks like for you. So in this demo version, we can see that, you know, finance and professional services, these are the departments that really seem to be embracing M365. Now, it's great to have those habits as well, but we can also then jump across and see how that's reflected in some of the higher level activity measures as well. So if something like meeting overload is something that you'd really like to focus on, you can then sort of line that up with your team's audio and video minutes, and hopefully see a downward trend there, but then seeing your channel messages and the more asynchronous ways of collaborating trending upwards. But the reason why we focus in on those collaboration habits, which is this view just here, is because it's a much more powerful way to get us to think about the way that we're currently working. This is much more meaningful for me to see as opposed to, you know, my bulk number of emails that I've sent in the last 90 days, for example. So that is my very quick view of what SWOOP for M365 looks like. You can run free trials of this platform as well, but I definitely also recommend you have a look at those, the benchmarking report that we've just released, and we can also provide a custom benchmark report for you as well. The link is in the chat there several times for you to download, but if you haven't quite got to it just yet, here's a QR code, and then if you just head to the SWOOP website, really, you'll find a link somewhere or something pointing you in the direction of the report. So that's sort of everything from SWOOP side today. So Kirsty, I might hand back to you.
Emily, can I just jump in? There's a question here from Kerry about how SWOOP works with Viva Insight, and probably Laurie, you'd be the best one to answer that question. We've got a minute to jump in.
Well, I think if you look in the report, there's a whole section on that because we do get asked that a lot. And but I guess one of the biggest differences, I guess, is that when you use Viva Insights, the paid version, it's mostly a project, and they set up and they, you know, you've got to have a project team on it, and they more or less do an analysis and then feedback just like a consulting project. I think with ours, you know, we've always aimed to have a dashboard that's telling you something all the time, so it's continuous. It's a little bit like the My Analytics, which is the small amount of dashboarding that Insights does. I guess we've built, you know, we're building something more like that, whereas what Insights is doing is going deep into things like, you know, sort of, you know, the manager, you know, individual behaviour, the one-on-one, you know, the time that you're spending in meetings versus, you know, free time and so forth. This is all quite valuable stuff too. But we see we're quite complementary. We don't overlap too much. A little bit in where do you spend your time? You saw on that chart, there's a bar chart of where you're spending your time. Is it in Teams, in email, or what have you? I think they do something similar. Insights doesn't look at Yammer at all. They don't look at channels much at all either. They tend to go from the email and the calendar part. That's where they started, and so their strength is in the calendar email. Our strength is in the Yammer channels, I guess, if you wanted to compare that sort of thing, because that's where we started. They started with email, we started with Yammer. So and we'll meet in the middle.
in the report, and you're talking about the video and the video communicator as one of those metrics. Are you seeing a real shift in that? Because I've seen a lot of video fatigue where there's no video on now in meetings and training and conferences, and it's just off. Everyone is off, and we're presenting to black screens, which we didn't do for the first year, but the second year, it's CBC
Yeah.
changing?
It's contextual, I guess. So
Yeah.
people, if they're attending a webinar like this, there's no real reason they feel to be showing their face, so they can just listen in and what have you. It doesn't help you as a presenter. You'd like to see them, obviously, but because we see you in the room, we like to see you digitally as well. But in essence, that's one of the, I think, one of the, I guess, tactics people are to get away from the stress of being on the camera, and when they don't need to be, I think. So, but having said that, when we look at the what's important to me, the camera on off wasn't one of the most, wasn't very highly sort of rated compared to, say, email overload and meeting overload and stuff like that. So it was probably, and even I think even people are starting to get better at using SharePoint rather than hiding stuff in OneDrive. We're starting to see that sort of benefit of moving. And I was one, I must admit, you know, I used to write all my stuff, and then when it was ready to share, I would share it on SharePoint. I don't do that anymore. I even put my drafts, because I realised that people don't want to look at my drafts anyway. It's not like they've got time to go searching at people's incomplete work, you know, so they're going to wait till you tell them, you know, have a look at this now or something like that. But the savings in terms of just, you know, synchronizing versions is huge by working in SharePoint. I think people have worked that out.
Yeah.
You know, so I think people are starting to realise, and the camera on off has always been fairly contentious. I guess I'm thinking now that, well, I always think it's important to have it on, but, you know, there's good reasons for not having it on, and people overall don't feel it's that important, you know, so I don't stress about it as much. So yeah. I'd be looking at the email overload, the meeting overload, the way that you, on the first meeting poll, I'd be sort of concentrating on those ones. And I think if you can get the teams,
collaboration habits.
That's right. I think if you can get the internal people, especially internally, working outside of email and just using chat, and the way we describe the chat thing, you know, if your chat message was to disappear tomorrow and you couldn't find it, would you worry about that, right? And if your chat message was, you know, I'm going to lunch now, do you want to join me? Well, then of course you're not worried if that disappears. But if it's like, you know, I put this document in XYZ folder or something like that, and you put it in the chat, you know, sort of, and it's gone tomorrow or the next day or what have you, it doesn't take long to roll off. In fact, one of the practices that one of the E Squared project manager gave us, he said, I can tell how chat liberated you are by looking at how old your oldest chat is on the screen. So if you look down your chat line and the oldest one is like 3 hours old, then you're too much in chat. You know, so he had a rule of thumb about chat liberation around that. So
awesome. Thanks very much, guys.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Very interesting insights. I know you always have some of those to be able to help us. I'm doing it now.
Yammer's coming up, so if anyone wants to be in the Yammer benchmarking, you'll have to connect to that.
Yep.
Data, and we also give you the data is anonymous. We get it up and we know it from you.
They won't be able to hear you online. I've realised.
Yeah.
I've come over a little closer to give you a hug.
Oh,
yeah, it's all in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Okay, so you're fine. Just to finalise, moving forward, thanks very much, guys. And of course, now it's not wanting to connect. Let's just, in terms of moving forward. Where you can find your Microsoft adoption content available online, where you can, the resource links. So these are all the standard, the user group, past sessions, and then we'll have our next one on the 2nd of August. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, more than happy to always hear them. I will post the recording up on YouTube for you very soon. I will make sure that it's downloaded so you can always keep up to date to go back over. So I do thank everyone that's come in from both those that have joined us in person as well as online. Thank you very much, everyone. Until next month, we're out for the day. Thank you so much, SWOOP. Everyone from SWOOP. I don't know if we've still got Kai here as well, but you know, Emily, Sharon, Dr. Laurence Lock Lee, and Kai, and just giving us a go download that report and have a bit of a trawl through. I love the fact you've got the calculators and you can start to use them for adoption. So that really help. I've got a couple that I'm going to be working on that one. So I may even come to you and go, how exactly, or what do I do? Thanks all. Okay, bye. Thanks for the session. Feel free to hang around if you would like to. I'll stop the recording in the meeting. If anyone has any questions online, I am more than happy to answer said questions if you want to come off mute as well.